We're headed just down to what is effectively the border between Lascelles, the area just back there, and Aston. And if you're from Lascelles and you cross this border and go into Aston, you're likely to get attacked. It seems amazing that you have something that most people around here do regard as a kind of unofficial border. It's almost between sort of Palestinians crossing into Israeli areas and vice versa. There is a very strong sense in which, you know, you belong in one area, not into another, and that the two sides are enemies. We're going through the underpass now, which is the official border. We've had a lot of knifings, a lot of shootings, and people affected on this side in Aston just as much as they have been in Lascelles. And again, victims all of the so-called postcode violence and postcode gangs. The government's own crime survey estimates that some 60,000 people are stabbed or knifed in the UK every year, the equivalent of 160 a day, and that many of the attackers and the victims are teenagers. I wanted to know why more and more of our young people are involved in gang-related street crime, so we spoke to Tony, who's been a gang member for most of his life. He puts it down to a combination of peer pressure and the need to belong.
You know, I came from a broken home, family on a low income, one-parent family, no money, wanted what every normal child had, decent pair of trainers and clothes. Family couldn't provide that, so I ended up on the streets looking for it for myself from round about the age of 10, 11.
Tony's views on the motives of young gangsters are chilling and sad.
The media portrays, unless you're wearing new clothes with fashion labels, unless you're driving a brand new car, then you're almost excluded from society unless you have these accessories. And without these accessories, you feel like an outcast in society. The power has been taken away from the people by the government, so you make your own power, and your own power is normally drugs, guns, and money. If we had to shoot people, we'd shoot people. If people had to die, people had to die, and that's just the way it was.
After a trial lasting 6 months, the four men were found guilty of the double murder and sentenced to 132 years in jail. The convictions of the four Burger Bar gang members were followed by a huge crackdown on gangs in Birmingham. 20 other leading members of the Burger Bar Boys and Johnson crew were jailed as an entire generation of gangsters were locked up for a total of almost 500 years. But the police crackdown, which was meant to bring an end to the gang problem, ironically made the situation even worse. The absence of gang structures created a void that's been quickly filled by a newer breed of gangster, younger, more volatile, and prepared to kill over territory. Everyone I've spoken to says that, if anything, the situation is worse today in Birmingham than it has been in previous years. And more than that, the situation is more chaotic and more unpredictable. You have younger men, in fact, nothing more than boys, carrying guns, more prepared to use violence, and there seems to be no rhyme or reason to when they resort to violence. It can be over the slightest trivial matter. It's no longer about criminal enterprise, it's about who I am and respecting me.
You've got a lot of younger gangsters now who have no real affinities or loyalties to anybody. It's become much more dangerous. Everybody wants to be that Billy Blanco from the Bronx now. There's no honour, if there was any in the first place, among thieves. It's a free-for-all. I don't care about your reputation. I've got a gun just like every other punk's got a gun, and I'll use it.
The police have their work cut out because new gangs constantly form, merge and break up as allegiances change, so they have no idea how many gangs there are now in the city. According to one local police officer, it's like wrestling with smoke.
The former Home Secretary and Redditch MP Jackie Smith has warned the government against taking a knee-jerk reaction to tackling gang culture following the summer riots. Jackie Smith's been investigating gangs for a radio documentary on BBC WM.
West Midlands Police has identified 45 new street gangs across the Force area. Our political reporter Susanna Mendonça has more.
Rioting and looting across our major cities. The government's looking at gang violence in the light of scenes like this in Birmingham, but the former Home Secretary Jackie Smith is warning the coalition not to bundle the two things together.
There's almost a problem that this government action has come out of the rioting that's happened in the summer, because certainly from what people in Birmingham have told me, that rioting and looting wasn't caused by gang activity. Now, if what comes out of it is a renewed focus from government on how to tackle the problem of gangs, that's okay, but don't think that it is the same answer to rioting as it is to gang violence.
When she was in government, Jackie Smith launched the Tackling Gangs Action Programme. One of those involved was Marcia Shakespeare, whose daughter Letitia was murdered, along with another teenager, Charlene Ellis, in a botched drive-by shooting in 2003.
I do it because of Letitia, but more so I do it to save a life.
Now she takes her story into schools like St Edmund Campion in Erdington, here joined by the former Redditch MP who's been investigating gangs for a radio documentary on BBC WM. She says the coalition government shouldn't tear up what's already been achieved.
I think that there was a lot of work done, however, the work needs to be continued. Rather than reinventing the wheel, there's already resources in place which need to be updated and continued.
The coalition government's carrying out a cross-departmental programme of action to tackle gangs and gang violence, and it says that that's being done following the disorder seen here in Birmingham and elsewhere back in August. Its new gang strategy is expected to tackle gun and knife crime. Jackie Smith says whatever they come up with, they shouldn't take a top-down approach.
Theresa May, Ian Duncan-Smith need to make recommendations about gangs, but they need to recognise that what they decide up in London is not what's going to make the difference on the ground. It's the people who are living here and who are still living here once the professionals have gone home, who have got to be involved in deciding what works and where the money is spent.
But will Theresa May take her advice? The Home Secretary is due to announce her plans later this month. Susanna Mendonça, BBC Midlands Today, Birmingham.
Well, Jackie Smith joins us now. Thanks very much indeed for coming in this evening. Making that documentary looked very illuminating, but isn't the sort of facts that you learnt making it, aren't they ones you should have known anyway as Home Secretary?
Well, there were two things really. First of all, I was able to go back and talk to some of the people who I did work with when I was Home Secretary about what we'd done together that had worked, perhaps what lessons we needed to learn. But there are things you can't do as Home Secretary, however hard you might want to try. And some of the access we had, particularly to young people who'd been pretty recently...
What sort of thing do you mean?
To young people who'd been pretty recently in gangs. That was very important for me because I think, you know, whilst not excusing what happens, understanding how people end up in a gang and particularly how very difficult and dangerous it is to leave a gang was one of the most important things that I certainly felt I learnt from doing the programme.
And that is interesting because that does seem to be that something you should have probably known as Home Secretary, information you should have had available to you. Now, you have said, haven't you, that Labour should have done more to stop the gang culture. That seems like a stunning admission. Do you feel sort of bad about that?
Well, I know it's very newsworthy if it's a stunning admission.
It does sound quite shocking from
what I actually said was, first of all, there is very good news. As the police told me, as those working on the ground told me, there are far fewer serious violent attacks and gang-related murders now than there were perhaps 5, 6, 7 years ago. That's good news, and that's down to the hard work of people locally. Well, no, this is the first time that the West Midlands Police have actually done this sort of survey. That's where they came up with the 45 urban street gangs figure from. They think they're making an impact, but of course there is more that needs to be done. Particularly, we're quite good at making sure, as Marcia Shakespeare is doing brilliant work, working with young people to tell them about the dangers of gangs. We're good in Birmingham because of some of the work that we particularly do here in getting in between gangs to prevent some of the retaliation and the violence. Where we now need to focus our efforts, I think, is on helping young people out of gangs.
Okay, very quickly, you are obviously very passionate about all of this, but why should the current government listen to a former Home Secretary? If you don't mind me saying, you're not even an MP anymore.
This isn't a party political thing, and, you know, everybody, all of us, want to ensure that there are fewer young people that are getting into gang-related violence, and certainly that there are no young people out shooting and killing other young people. If I can make a contribution to that, then I'm pleased about that, and I hope it's something that will be helpful to those who've now got that responsibility resting on their shoulders.
Do you wish this something you could have done as Home Secretary, though?
Well, I'm glad that we made a difference. There are lives that have been saved in Birmingham because of the hard work of people that I worked with when I was Home Secretary. But this isn't something that we can now turn our back on. We can learn the lessons, and we can continue to make a difference.
OK, Jackie Smith, thanks very much for coming in.
Thank you.